1st of March, 2021. After hours, a lawyer files an emergency application, trying to force an insurer to say yes. It doesn't work. And by midnight, the trade credit cover supporting billions in financing is gone. 7 days later, administrators walk into the London office. What they start unwinding is still unfinished 5 years on. Last month, it finally caught up with him. 9 years, banned from running a company anywhere in Britain. He started a long way from any of this. A cane and melon farm in Queensland, thousands of miles from any trading floor. Citigroup, then Morgan Stanley. He learned the plumbing of trade finance from inside the banks, then left to rebuild it. The idea itself is boring, and boring is exactly why almost nobody looked at it closely enough. A supplier ships goods and then waits 60 days to get paid. Greensill pays them now, at a small discount. The buyer settles later with Greensill instead. Greensill bundles what it's owed into notes and sells those notes to investors. Most of them ended up in funds run out of Zurich and were sold on from there to investors. Bloomberg has valued the firm anywhere from $3.5 to $7 billion, depending on when you ask. Money on that scale buys the room. David Cameron, a former prime minister, joined as a paid advisor. When the pandemic hit, he lobbied the Treasury for access to state support. Greensill did not get everything it asked for. Cameron later answered for the lobbying in front of a select committee. But the lobbying was never the real exposure. The real exposure was a single client. It was very large, and it made steel. Sanjeev Gupta's GFG Alliance. Steel, aluminium, and mines across 3 continents. And, by some distance, Greensill's biggest client. GFG describes some of that financing, in its own words, as prospective receivables, sometimes called future receivables. And underneath all of it sat a small, unremarkable bank in northern Germany, bought in 2014. It became an important funding channel for the group. Then German towns discovered it, and a second problem began. Negative rates meant parking public cash actually cost a town money. Greensill Bank paid interest instead of charging it. Around 50 municipalities moved deposits in. One city said its very good credit rating was why it assumed the money was safe. German deposit protection covers private savers. It does not cover institutions. The towns were never covered at all, but much of this machine depended on something far more fragile than steel or deposits: trade credit insurance. On the 8th of July, 2020, an underwriter at the insurer BCC was dismissed from his job. In Australian court documents, the insurer's position was that he'd bound cover beyond his delegated authority. That allegation is untested. Separately, later that month, BCC said it would not renew. Greensill challenged the notice and lost. Without cover, the notes were unsellable, and the funds would stop buying within days. Which brings us back to that out-of-hours application. It failed. Cover expired on the 1st of March, 2021. 2 days later, BaFin moved on the Bremen Bank. A moratorium, no normal business, no outgoing payments. A forensic special audit had found the bank couldn't evidence receivables it had booked from GFG. Insolvency followed within days. On the 8th of March, administrators were appointed in Britain. In Zurich, around $10 billion of supply chain funds were shut. In Germany, deposit protection eventually paid out 2.7 billion euros. The towns got none of that money. Then 5 years of relative quiet. And this summer, the reckoning arrived in 3 countries at once. Start with Britain. The case wasn't about the collapse at all. It was about $440 million. The insolvency service set out that transactions with a U.S. construction company removed a Credit Suisse fund's legal protections. On that account, $440 million went to something other than repaying the fund. The notes defaulted. He fought it hard. A stay application, then a strikeout, then a bid to appeal. All refused. 6 days before a 6-week trial, he signed an undertaking instead, not disputing certain facts for those proceedings only. The insolvency service had sought a ban of up to 15 years. It settled at 9, running to 2035. In Germany, prosecutors charged 3 people last December: 2 former management board members and 1 former supervisory board member. Lex Greensill is not among them. He isn't a party to the Australian proceedings, and no criminal conviction against him exists anywhere. Prosecutors allege the 3 caused the insolvency and misrepresented the lending. The court hasn't yet decided whether it goes to trial. The Serious Fraud Office is investigating GFG for suspected fraud, fraudulent trading, and money laundering. That case remains open. In May, one insurer settled claims with a face value of roughly 4 billion Australian dollars, conceding no liability. About 3 billion more is untried. The remaining trial is listed from August 3rd. 2.7 billion euros was paid to protected customers. The town's got none of it. 9 years for the founder. And 5 years later, this story still isn't over.